Welcome to another edition of Test Me Time with me, Doug Harris, and I'm very excited, I think, because it's going to be an exciting story, to welcome today Rob Joy. Thanks for joining me, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
I read somewhere that you describe yourself as a passionate evangelist.
Yeah, I do.
Is there any other sort?
Well, there shouldn't be. There shouldn't be any other sort, but unfortunately today I think there is a few that go through the motions. So yeah, I just believe in being passionate for God in whatever degree that is, as a pastor, as an author, as a preacher, as an evangelist.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got all those titles up on the screen for you. I mean, in fact, we take up the whole screen with your titles, I think. But let's set the scene. Let's go back in time and prior to 2005.
Yeah.
Describe your life to us.
Okay, all right. In detail, basically I had a praying mum. You know, I had a mum that prayed and interceded for me for nearly 20 years, and she prayed my two sisters into the kingdom, both from drug backgrounds and sort of immoral backgrounds. But then I was just a real stubborn one. I was the youngest of three. My mum became a Christian when I was 5, and everything changed in the home because my dad was very anti-God. And so all of the arguments in my home seemed to be around the name Jesus, the word church, God, religion, Christianity. And so I developed a real hatred. Over a period of time, I developed an absolute hatred for Christianity, for God, for church. Everything that I was created to know and have, I hated. And so I rebelled and fought it hammer and tooth. You know, I just went against God in every way I possibly could. Had a lot of issues growing up with anger and sort of a lot of hatred, insecurities, fears. Seen my sister Tracy hooked on drugs, really put me off drugs throughout the age of about 10 to 15. And when I got to the age of 16, stupidly in the pub one day with my best friend, absolutely drunk, decided to give in to his temptation of taking some drugs. Took some drugs, loved it, became very, very addicted, very, very quick, had that kind of personality. And I absolutely went hammer and nail into the life of drugs. By the time I was 17, 18, I was taking cocaine, I was wrapped up in it, the violence that followed it, the gang culture, everything about my life was waking up in the morning and getting my next fix.
It seems, I mean, it's interesting, you had a praying mum, and yet because of the reaction in your family, that wasn't a positive thing in your life. That actually became a negative thing.
It did in one sense. I mean, I had Jesus preached at me 5 times a day, every single day for 17 years. And so, you know, and my mum, to her, in her credit, she'll admit, in her early days, quite religious about it as well. And so it was all law and, you know, we're all on a journey. And my mum changed as time went on, but my father wouldn't let her and I wouldn't let her. You know, she would come and she would say, oh, I got that bit wrong. And so it was about her finding her own roots in God, I suppose, and trying to work it out as she went along. Now, for me, the early days set the scene, and I just saw Jesus as the enemy. I saw Christianity as the enemy. I, like most people, blamed God for all of the problems in the world, and religion as the biggest killer of mankind, and all of these arguments I had. And so I bought into the lie of evolution or the Big Bang or whatever was going around at the time, anything except God. But God loved me, and you know, as hard as I was fighting against him, he was fighting a lot harder for me. You know.
But there was quite a way down yet before that really happened. Okay, so you got into drugs. Yeah. That led on to all sorts of other things, didn't it?
The drug. I always tell people the drugs are not the problem. The drugs and the alcohol is not the problem. It's a fruit that grows on a root. And for me, the real problem, I think, was insecurities and lack of affirmation from my father. He was a real man's man, or what this world portrays as a man's man. So he was brought up, he wanted me to grow up tough, so he would give me advice that I certainly wouldn't give my 6-year-old son today. You know, if somebody fights you and hits you, then you go back with a weapon and you take them out. And it was all sort of gangland culture kind of a mentality. And so the drugs and the drink fueled the violence and the anger that was in my heart. And that was probably the worst problem I had. By the time I was 19, I was starting my first prison sentence in a Youth Offenders Institute, HMP Onley in Warwickshire. I was sentenced to 18 months for ABH, GBH, carrying an offensive weapon. A young man fell into a coma, a big gang fight, his gang v my gang. We got the better of them, if you want to call it that, in this event. And this poor guy nearly died. He was in a coma. And I remember my dad saying to me, son, I heard this young man's going to die. And my response was, Dad, if he dies, he dies. He shouldn't have punched James in the face. You know, in my gangster wannabe mentality and in my, my gang culture lifestyle, I would have felt justified killing a man because he punched one of my friends. That was the code we lived by, and it was totally perverted.
You're getting into gangs. Was that because you were looking for camaraderie, friendship, acceptance? Was that why you went into the gang culture?
I believe with all my heart, passionately, I was created to be a fighter. I think we all are. I believe that for injustice and for the unborn child and for, you know, righteousness in the land and all the, you know, inside every single person on the planet is a born fighter. But the devil comes along and he steals that God-given gift and ability, and he uses it for his glory. And so my ability to lead people, I had guys selling my drugs for me. I had a drug racket. I was selling 15,000, 20,000 pounds of cocaine every other weekend and had 5 guys driving around selling drugs for me. I had that ability to pull people into my ventures, if you like, and corrupt them. And that was just the devil stealing the leadership gift of my life. And he'll do anything he can to rob what God's given you. And so whatever that is, you know. So I believe that when God saved me, when he reached me at the cross and when I turned my life over to him, he didn't stop me being a fighter. He just corrected my thinking of what I was supposed to fight for.
Mm-hmm. You got into a lot of violence a number of times in prison?
Twice I went to 5 different jails under 2 separate sentences. When I was 21, I hit a man around the back of the head with my gun in the high street. It was all in the newspapers. On the radio, I was arrested on the scene with one shoe on, one shoe off, a black eye, a split lip. They had my gun. Someone had grabbed hold of the gun that had fell out of my hand on the street, put their guns in my face. Their guns were a lot bigger than mine, so I surrendered quite quickly. And I remember my only concern as I was going to the police station, knowing I was going to go to prison for what could be a very long time, I remember my only concern being I'm going to miss the England-Brazil game because it was during the World Cup. Right. And I remember getting into Bedford prison, finding out that now they have TVs in every prison cell and thinking, yes, I can watch the football. Yeah. That was my biggest concern. You know, prison didn't change me.
Right, right. Prison didn't change you. No. I mean, obviously, you know, nearly killing somebody didn't change you. But obviously now you are changed.
Yeah.
How did that change take place?
Well, I mean, I believe it's over a period of time. It was prayer, really. My mum's prayers and the church's prayers and a lot of other people crying out to God on my behalf. God loved me and he wanted to break into my heart and he was going to do all he can to do that. But it took me a long time. I always say to people, there's a big difference between humility, humbling yourself, and being humbled. I was made humble by God. He made me fall to my knees and cry out for his help. I was contemplating suicide. I was at the end of my rope. I'd become a crack cocaine addict. I lost £250,000 that my father left me in drug dealings and other money. All my friends didn't want to, but they had to turn their back on me. I took 2 of my best friends hostage for 3 hours at knife point. I put another man in a coma in the middle of the high street. I'd become so violent and so psychotic. I was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, put on all kinds of medication. My mum took me to the local hospital and begged them to section me, my own mum, crying her eyes out because she knew I was going to kill someone or be killed. And that was where my life was going. And it really took me to hit absolute rock bottom, hearing voices, seeing things that weren't real, standing at the top of a bridge, looking at the lorries 3 o'clock in the morning, hurtling towards me, trying to get the courage to throw myself in front of a lorry because I was so desperate.
So by this time, as you say, when you first started this life, you were quite happy with it. There was nothing wrong. But you had gone so far and so long that you'd come to the place where actually you couldn't stand the life you were in.
Totally. I remember a guy coming to Pearl, 2 guys, Mike Parkin and Pete McCallum, who are still my heroes today, and I'm still in contact with them. Pete McCallum was a 19-year-old lad. He came to pray for me. I accepted prayer. I got to the point where I was willing to try prayer because I was that desperate. My sister begged me to let these guys come round. And I remember before they left, they'd finished praying for me, which was very passionate prayer, and I was like, kind of, wow, this is different than I realised. Pete said to me, I've just had a picture for you as I'm praying, and I asked him what it was, and it was a bit weird for me. It was a bit spiritual and mystical. And he said this, the picture he had was of me smiling and laughing in a bath full of mud, and the only part of my body that was out of the water, or the muddy water, was my mouth, and I was taking my last breath, but at the same time, I was enjoying myself. And so I was literally enjoying my sin. That's what the picture meant to him, is I was enjoying my sin because there's a lot of pleasure in sin.
Yeah.
But I didn't realise how close I was to dying. I was taking my last breath, and it put the fear of God in me.
Mm-hmm. So you accepted that as real, that picture.
Yeah.
And did that make the impression on you that caused you to move towards God, or was there still other places to go?
It was one of many. I remember my sister Nicola saying to me, Rob, why don't you ask God if he's real, but don't ask him in a way, prove yourself to me, God. Yeah. Ask him in a humble way and he'll come, because he's not hiding. He doesn't need to reveal himself to somebody that's arrogant about it, but he doesn't hide from people either. And so I asked God in this box room, my sister's spare room in her house, and some stuff happened to me which, okay, people may not appreciate it, but I wasn't in control of what was happening to me at that moment. And there was a peace in my heart that I hadn't had before. And I remember feeling the Lord speak to me then and saying to me, you can get out of this if you want to. I'm not going to control your life, but I can lead it if you let me. Mm-hmm. And so I started to have a revelation that God was real. So I stopped doubting God. I started believing God. But now the decision needed to be made. Was I going to follow the way of God or follow my own way? And that took a longer time before I actually got to my knees and said yes to Jesus and his ways.
I think for many people it's a journey,
yeah,
isn't it? A process.
Totally.
It's sort of you've gone downhill,
yeah,
and you bottom out, and,
yeah,
and then you start that
yeah,
journey, as it were, back towards God. But the encouraging thing is, of course, is that God is there,
yeah,
encouraging you along.
Sure.
He's not playing hard to get, but
no.
Yes, you did need to make that decision, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, God, I believe, one of my favourite verses is in the book of Hebrews, Hebrews 10, I think it's verse 14, where it says that by one offering, he has perfected forever those who are being sanctified. So at the cross, when I said yes to Jesus 6.5 years ago, I believe with all my heart that I was absolutely perfected in God there, and then I believe everyone that comes to Christ is. It says we've become a new creation. It doesn't say you're becoming new, it says you are new. But the reality of that is worked out, the progress. Philippians 1 verse 6 is, you know, he will complete what he's begun. And so I stand before God now completely perfect in the image of Christ, but my mindset and my behaviour needs to catch up with that truth. And so even now, you know, as a passionate Christian, somebody who loves Jesus, I am in major battles in my life. I've got stuff still being dealt with and mindsets that needs to be renewed. But I'm on the journey and I've got hope and faith that what he's begun in me, he will complete it in me.
So you're on that journey and it's been going for a few years now. When you first made that decision, when you first finally came to that point and said, right, Lord, you know, I'll let you do it. You've died for me. You've done it for me. I'll let you do it. Was there some immediate changes, or I mean, because you'd lived this life of crime, this life of drugs, all the stuff that are going on, you know, flick of the switch, everything all right?
Loads of things changed overnight. Literally, I prayed a prayer on my knees with a crack cocaine pipe next to me, empty, which is a desperate thing for a crack cocaine addict. I had pornographic magazines at the bottom of my bed. I had a gun under my pillow and a knife nailed to my wall. Everything that represented my life, violence, addiction and immorality, the three main things that stained my existence. I fell on my knees through tears and said yes to Jesus Christ, let him in. I woke up the next morning a different man. I knew that something internal had completely transformed in my life. And I stopped overnight. I remember my gangster friend ringing me up 3 months into my walk with God and saying, he just got out of prison. He says, I've heard you're a Christian. I said, yeah, that's right. I've heard you don't even swear anymore. And I said, oh yeah, I didn't even try and stop swearing. I used to swear every other word. That immediately changed. The desire for drugs left me. But 3 months in, I started to feel some temptation again. Mm-hmm. You know, that the reality of being alive on the earth, you know, sinful nature and flesh, it crept back in. And that's when it was necessary for me to have a good pastor, Mike Parkin. He walked with me, he explained the Bible to me, he showed me scriptures, he opened my eyes to a lot of truth. And then when I realised I couldn't do it in my hometown, he helped me pack my bags and get on a train 4 hours up to Newcastle, joined the church up there, stayed there for 4 years, left my little newborn baby boy, my family and my friends, everything I had to get my life right, because I knew I wanted to do the right thing by God.
It's interesting, isn't it, that God is all powerful, but
Yeah.
he's not going to, so as you say, dominate us.
Totally right.
And sometimes we have to move away
Yeah.
from that place of temptation. We
Yeah.
have to move away. I think, you know, the book of Ephesians is very interesting. It says, you know, you used to steal, don't steal anymore. I
Exactly,
mean,
yeah.
it's so practical. Is that something that really helped you and something you would recommend to some people? Okay, don't necessarily try and do it all by yourself where you are. Move to somewhere else with other people that can help you.
I believe this. I believe God won't ever let you do it by yourself. He's not created us to be able to do it all by ourselves. And I'm somebody that's naturally motivated and quite disciplined and determined. And so I'm like a little pit bull. I was for the devil and I am now for God. And so for me, my danger is thinking that I can do this and going into that works mentality rather than grace mentality. And my wife, I'm newly married, my wife Lydia is amazing at that. She's got a great grace revelation and she's teaching me a lot about it at the minute. Mm-hmm. But I do believe we can do our part. And so, for example, coming out of a very immoral background where pornography is so rife on the internet, do I sit there and struggle with the temptation of it, or do I put an accountability program on my internet, which even as a leader of a ministry and a charity, I have that in place. So I can't, if I'm weak, if I'm tempted, that option's not there for me. And so for me, I believe in removing as many of the options as you can, humanly speaking, mm-hmm. while still working on the heart issue, trusting God. If you mess up, if you fall down, you get back up and you believe in faith. No, that's not who I am anymore. Remind yourself of who you are and keep on going.
It's cooperation with God, isn't it? We can't do those changes, but we can cooperate with him so he can do those changes within us.
Yeah.
What sort of things? I mean, as you say, you talk about an accountability program on your computer. I mean, what things have you put in place that enables you to grow and it enables this continuing change to take place?
Okay, I've got people that come to me and they're accountable to me. Young guys ask me for their help, but I'm still accountable to someone else myself. And so every Monday, Pete McCallan, the 19-year-old guy from back then, he's younger than me now, he's about to get married himself, he's a worship leader in a church in Cambridge. He rings me up every single Monday, he's faithful to that, and I've asked him to at my request, and I say, Pete, ring me up every Monday and ask me how I'm doing with holiness issues. Ask me how I'm doing, you know, am I being unfaithful to my wife? You know, question me. And I don't ever want to be unfaithful to my wife, and I'm sure I won't be. Mm-hmm. But I'm still a red-blooded man, and so I put practices in place and principles in place to try and protect me. Give me that extra, you know, Pete's going to ring me on Monday, I better make sure this week, which sounds a bit works mentality, but the whole time I'm looking at God and saying, God, it's your finished work on the cross that's given me this opportunity, but I want to honour you, I want to live a holy life. I'm a very immoral man, my mindset needs renewing every single day, but I'm passionate about purity. It's something I believe is my inheritance, and it's something that I believe I need to exercise the right to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, as you were saying, this is part of your ongoing.
Definitely.
You know, we are being sanctified. The justification takes once, but the being sanctified.
The working out of it.
But I guess you've really got to be willing. You're talking about Pete ringing you up everywhere, but that can only work if you are willing. In other words, what you're saying is, Lord, I so want this to work. I will do what is necessary. Yeah,
I mean, I could lie to Pete. He could ring me up and I could lie and tell him everything's fine, blah, 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 when it's not. And so I've had to make the definite decision in my heart that I will not hide from this stuff. If I mess up, I confess it. If I'm struggling, I ask for prayer and help. Normally that's my wife or Paul, my best friend, or Pete, you know, my accountability partner. And so I've got a handful of people, a pastor figure in my life, Colin Cooper, who pastors a great church, and I'll text him and ring him and he'll just send me a little encouragement and reminder, and people that I trust to become vulnerable with. Mm-hmm. And so one of my favourite quotes from a guy called D.L. Moody, who's one of, you know, I read his books, and he said that God is yet to see, or the world is yet to see, what God can do with a man who is fully his. So fully surrendered. And so every day I believe in fighting to stay on your knees. You know, we can easily get back up and walk on our own strength, but I live in a place where I fight to stay surrendered to God. That's tough in this world, in this generation, with all of the stuff on billboards and on the internet. Yeah. But it's God's grace is capable of it.
And what do you do when you do fail? I mean, okay, you desire, you want to serve God, in fact, but you get a day and you fail.
Yeah.
What do you do?
I fall into grace. I force myself to, which my natural default is to fall into works. Right, I'm going to fast. So I get up and I say, right, I messed up, you see, today I'm going to start a 6-week fast. And my wife's like, you're fasting all the time. You know, what's wrong with you? And then God showed me again in Hebrews, where it says that the priests used to offer sacrifices for the atoning of sins, they did that to remember their sins. And God's told me, when you come to the cross, I don't want you to keep remembering your sin, because if you remember it, you'll probably keep doing it. And so remember the cross. So it's just a quick switch of the mind now that I'm learning every day, and I'm getting better at this, is instead of remembering the sin I've just committed, I remember the cross and the Saviour that nailed that sin to the cross, and I fall into grace rather than into works.
And I mean, your book, which I think has just been published, has it?
It's a revised edition. I brought out my own version of it called Satan's Lost His Grip on Me in 2007, but I sent this to Authentic Media. They've made massive improvements to it. New cover, new title, a new chapter. So
it's called Internal Revolution. And by the way, you can get details from Rob's website, which is up on the screen, or Amazon, or all good Christian bookshops, as they say. Mind you, I suppose most Christian bookshops are good. So whoops. Anyway, but it's called Internal Revolution. Is that what you're talking about there? In other words, what you're talking about is you have a choice of the way you live. I find this very interesting. I've done many interviews like this, and I don't think anybody's actually spelt it out the way that you are doing here. You have a choice. You can choose to go that way. You can choose to be depressed because you go that way, or you can choose to remember what God has done.
The book's called Internal Revolution. A friend of mine, Jody, came up with the title. I was asking a few close friends. That inward change that's happened, it's definitely happened. There's been a revolution of my thinking, of my emotions, of my intellect, but I'm still on the journey of that becoming more of a reality in my mind every day. I'm currently writing a follow-up book called Internal Resolution, because without the resolution, you'll lose the revolution, is my phrase. And so I'm looking at the Bible and trying to use my journey. The subtitle of it is My Greatest Battle, which is talking about a lot of immorality as a Christian, and how God's bringing me through that and has brought me through so much of that and still is today. But without that determination that I am going to fight to stay at the cross, I'm going to fight to stay in grace. If I fall, I'm going to get back up. And now it helps to have good people around you, and I'm very fortunate to have very good people. My wife is the best. She lets me do all of the preaching and come on TV or radio or newspapers and things like that. No one really sees much of her, but she is the one who's my main armour bearer, and she lifts me up every day. And she just reminds me, God loves you still, he loves you still. And I think the more you realise who you are in Christ and what he's done on the cross, when you fully realise that you are holy because of the blood, you'll start to be holy because of the blood. And it's about knowing what Christ has really done in your heart so that you can live out that truth on the earth.
What it seems to me is the honesty that you have about yourself and with the Lord, as well as with other. That honesty has really stood you in good stead and has enabled God to do things in your life which he couldn't have done if you weren't honest with him.
Totally right. And I believe if I lose that vulnerability and transparency, I'll lose my freedom. Not my eternal salvation, but I'm talking about I'll fall back into bondage, I'm sure, because I've got a fleshly nature. And it's fighting for vulnerability. I've seen and been around so many pastors and leaders, even recently, that great speakers and communicators and all of that, and great builders of a church or what church is supposed to be today, but yet there's no vulnerability, and all of a sudden there's breakdown in certain areas of their life. And it's like, could that have been avoided through humility? Could it have been avoided through saying to somebody, look, this is where I'm at right now, rather than waiting until you've fallen, get to somebody while you're leaning, you know, and say, prop me back up again. And so I've been judged, I think, a lot of times on my transparency, and people say you're too honest with people, and you know, even from the platform I'll preach, and I've admitted pornography issues and all these kind of problems that I've had in the past, but God's brought me through. He's been faithful, and I want to say to another generation, you know, that's full of shame and guilt, and especially Christian leaders, you know, confess your sins one to another that you may be healed. And you've got to use wisdom in that and not broadcast certain
You've got to
stuff.
go to the right people.
You've got to go to the right people and people that are going to give you grace. Mike Parkin is my hero. He lives in America now, but he's immediately on email to me, and he always reminds me of Grace. And he's just a great father figure in my life, and I want to see more people like that. When young guys come to me and say, Rob, I'm struggling with these issues, I want to say to them, I'm struggling too, let's walk together, you know?
I mean, you know, I started by saying you were passionate, and obviously that's been really borne out through this interview. What have you been able to help people that maybe you knew in the gang crime before, or certainly are in that now? Are you able, because of your passion, because of your honesty, because of what God has done? Are you able to help them?
Yeah, we have the charity now, Storming the Nations, which we're currently rebranding to Rising Generation. It's about rising up and being a part of this generation and equipping people. But I've had a politician stay at my house, whose name I won't mention because he's known quite well, who was a confessed alcoholic, really struggling, read my book, prayed a prayer of salvation with me over a meal, stayed in contact with me, and is now getting freedom himself.
Great. Rob,